One of the most influential people in my life was my principal in elementary school. In Harlem, it's tough, by all means. As soon as you leave school at 3 o'clock, life hits you. She was the first to really have us believe in ourselves. We repeated a motto every morning that basically what we said was that we were greatness. And for the first time in my life, I was told that I was great. And I wanted all of my actions to be reflected and called great. Doc Rivers gave a couple of speeches that were directly impactful to me. Following the police shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he went on to talk about how much, African Americans love this country, yet it always seems like the country doesn't love us back.
It's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back.
What hit me most was the conviction in his voice.
You don't need to be black to be outraged. You need to be American and outraged. It's just really sad. We gotta do better.
Like many great leaders, when he spoke, we listened and we followed. And this was just a stepping stone to pushing things out the door and creating sustainable change. I'm very interested in education reform because it directly involves our youth. I'm a firm believer in the saying that kids are the future, and I would love to create sustainable change so that after-school programs are not only helping with homework, but they're allowing kids to find their own interest. And just like me, these kids are picking up activities and hobbies that could ultimately lead to life-changing scholarship opportunities. It's important that everyone understand that no matter how big or small you are, you have a platform, and how you utilize that platform is on you. And I just want to go and show the generation that's behind me that I'm paying homage to those who came before me, and I'm using it the right way. Education reform is foundational for our society to evolve, but players before me had many injustices to overcome in order to have the basic civil rights. Players like Elgin Baylor. As an athlete, you can never stop learning about the history of the game you play. It's about knowing who came before you and knowing what they did to change the sport and change so much else too. When you talk about the guys like that in basketball, one OG who I think doesn't get enough recognition is Elgin Baylor. Elgin grew up in Washington, D.C. in the 40s and the 50s, back when the city was still segregated. But Elgin could play basketball, and boy was he a star. Ended up far away going to college in the Pacific Northwest, becoming college basketball's best player. The Minneapolis Lakers drafted him with the #1 overall pick in 1958. They were one of the worst teams in the league, but in Elgin's first season, he took them to the NBA Finals. That's how great of a player Elgin Baylor was, the original master of hang time, way ahead of his time. The Lakers owner even said that if Elgin hadn't come along, he would have gone out of business. Instead, 2 years later, he moved the team to Los Angeles, and Elgin was the original Hollywood Lakers star. In 1959, the Lakers were playing an exhibition game in Charleston, West Virginia. When they got to their hotel, Elgin and the team's other 2 black players weren't allowed to check in. Eventually, the team found a different hotel, but there was still a problem. No restaurant in the town would let them eat inside. They had to go to the supermarket and make sandwiches in their room. So when it came time for the game, Elgin said he wasn't playing. This was the first time an NBA player boycotted playing a game. "I want to be treated like a human being," he later said. "I'm not an animal put in a cage and let out for a show." Elgin eventually got an apology from the mayor, and when the All-Star game was held in Charleston a few years later, Elgin went. He stayed at that hotel that hadn't let him stay there. He ate at the restaurants that hadn't given him a table. And African-American leaders in the area told him that what had happened to him led the city to make changes and speed up integration. When I think about everything we went through last year, the stance that the league and the players took against the injustice in our country, I think of Elgin too. What he endured, what he fought for, and what he accomplished for the rest of us. You can't measure that kind of thing. When my generation takes the court, and when we make decisions about what to do with the influence we have, I don't think there's any better role model than Elgin Baylor. He's an OG of OGs, and we've got a responsibility to keep up all the work he started all those years ago. Elgin's actions back in the day directly points to things that happened recently with us in the bubble, with the boycott. Seeing that it was done before by someone as great as Elgin made us all the more comfortable with really going out there and standing up for what's right. Elgin helped me understand that my career wouldn't be punished for doing what's right, and that this situation wouldn't be an either or. Everything that he put into motion and all of his aspirations are being lived through in this day and this time. Learning about education and voters' reform parallels perfectly with Elgin's past because voting was one of the key mechanisms to putting Elgin's aspirations in line. My next step in voting and education reform is to, one, spread awareness. As far as education reform, I really want to create sustainable change in after-school programs and incentivize teachers so that they care more about their students. My advice to those who don't necessarily know how to get started in the social reform movement is to read, watch, and listen. There are conversations to be had, meetings to attend, and organizations to donate your time to. Those conversations might necessarily not be the most comfortable, but the fact that you're having them leads to growth. As far as fighting social injustices, I want the next generation to understand how important education reform is and how important it is to an improved society. Educate yourself. That's how we'll see progress.